大家好，希望大家已经用。
Hello, everyone. Hope you have enjoyed your lunch break. We will begin our next session, Deinstitutionalization.
现在有。はい。リホ、アンニョハセヨ、ハロー、こんにちは。日本の京都から。
Hello, everyone. I am from Kyoto, Japan. I'm Ito Kasumi from Ritsumeikan University, and I will serve as the moderator for this session, Deinstitutionalization. And hopefully, with this session, we can have extensive exchange and dialogue. So without further ado, let's invite our first presenter, Jeff Lee, to talk about this session.
好，各位朋友，大家午安。
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yichun Jeff from Graduate Institute of Rehabilitation Counseling and CUE. My topic is on reflection on the alternative refuges in Taiwan, historical time-class controversies and governance challenges. So here's the background of my research. The issue I want to talk about is Taiwan's society, besides the institutions in the name of education and medicine, and be allowed by Taiwanese government. I want to explore whether there are abilities to have the other refuges outside of institutionalization in rural countries and besides or outside of government's supervision. So that is something I want to explore.
我认为，
In my opinion, I feel like if we can understand these institutions, understand their development and their historical context of alternative refuges, and to understand the controversy and issues and problems, only can we know how to respond to these institutions after understanding more about them. So now I would refer to them as alternative refuge. So first, I'd like to talk about the historical context of alternative refuge, and due to time constraints, I will skip through the examples. But the background is that back in 1980s, there is no professional expertise in institution, and social work only became a part of social development back in 1980s in Taiwan. So it was the early beginning of social welfare and social service. So it's very difficult to distinguish between formal institution and alternative institutions. And up until 1990s, because of the CSO's advocacy, Taiwan's government finally formulates regulations and discussing the qualification or criteria for formal institution. So with legislation, we finally begin discussing how to control the quality of institution care. And as the movement of deinstitutionalization, we begin to discuss abolishing or eliminating institutions, private institutions or unregistered institutions. And the research showed that after the 1980s, there are a lot of unregistered institutions, and which are heading towards the history or being closed down after 2002. The description was too positive to me. It seems like after 2002, we're able to regulate or supervise the care or quality in these unregistered institutions, but I think that's questionable. So next, I will give you an example to discuss whether there are legal limitations in supervising institutions, and we do have alternative refuge. We do have these unregistered institution that is not under the supervision of the bureaucracy, and it's so complex that cannot be defined. So I will give you an example of the Hebron co-living house, and to show you this complexity of the actual situation and the controversy in terms of human rights aspects. So for this Hebron co-living house, it is established around the year 2000 in Taoyuan by a pastor taking in those are excluded from the social service or social welfare system in Taiwan, including persons with disability, victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse, or single-parent families, former addicts, and the homeless, or the escaped migrant workers, or those who have fallen to credit card debt, etc. So according to the founder's own words, Chen Gongliang, he said that he wants to welcome all those who are excluded from the society. And the volume of service is quite large. As of 2014, the co-living home in Taoyuan service up to 6,000 people a year with 200 residents. So it's a really large-scale, complex facility or institution. And the system is quite complex. You do not necessarily have to make payments to live at the co-living institution. You can pay a sort of rent between 7,000 NT dollars to 15,000 NT dollars. And if you don't have work to support your own living, you have a labor assignment arranged to you within the community. So there is a co-owning system in place. And for a period of time, they even have their own currency issued within this community. So it's a closed community and economic system. Beside living together, labor together, and have this worship instilled in the lifestyle. Another feature is that the residents of the co-living home is categorized into a unit of 5 to 10 as a so-called family, and they can form an alternative family within the community. And the founder, Chen Gongliang, and his wife serves as the ultimate father and mother in the community. And each family unit is categorized into 2 years of courses. And all the family members have to take courses, take lessons. And if you are a male resident in the community, you fit the expectations of the family unit, then you may be assigned a wife. And you can marry and have children, and the children will be raised within this closed community as well. And the children in the community are all homeschooled collectively. So it is a really, really closed up community. And in a family-based community like this, and the home claims that the residents can leave at will. So this community itself is not registered. It's only receiving the residents in the name of this Hebron Foundation, Social Care Foundation, but without any registration as a charity organization, but they still receive donations from the society. And they even take commissions from the government. So for the nearly 20 years, an institution like this, does it categorize as an institution? According to the CRPD committee's deinstitutionalization guidelines issued in 2021, in Article 14 states the elements of deinstitutionalization. There should be certain regulations, but for Hebron co-living home, all the residents may be segregated from the general or overall society. So this in the name of family. and the paternal care of the institution is qualified as an institution. However, this is an alternative refuge that the bureaucracy or the bureaucratic system doesn't really have an angle to intervene. So there are a lot of issues at hand. Even though the community seems to take in a lot of those who are excluded from the social welfare system, but from the past 10 years, courts decisions and reports by Control Yuan shows that the community had at least 2 incidents with people with disability or sexually abused, and there are violence from volunteers to the residents, leading to the death of the person with disability. And that's because of the violence or scolding from the volunteers in the community. So it shows that even though the perpetrators, they may be sentenced in the criminal courts, but up until 2022, before the Control Yuan initiated investigations, this co-living community was not accounted for any of the incidents that took place. So the community was run, but they didn't apply for permits for a care institution. They didn't hire suitable professional staff or caretakers, but they have the facts of taking care of people with disabilities. So according to government definition, they're not registered, but they're not unregistered institution. So it's really in a blurry situation, in gray area. So whenever an incident happens, the court system can only trial the individual perpetrators, but the accountability of the institution cannot be sought. In 2022, in the CRPD National Review, the co-living community was under the spotlight, and the founder of the co-living community met legal issues and was sentenced to prison. So this organization went out of limelight of the society, but it doesn't seem that it's not that institutions or alternative refuge like this disappear, and the residents still live like this, continue to adopt this model, and they claim that this institution is their home. So if there is no comprehensive measures or systematic measures for deinstitutionalization, it's very difficult to address a community like this. And I think the government needs to take further considerations in future strategies. So quickly go to my conclusion. Considering the social backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and family structure of Taiwan and general public's awareness towards disability is lacking compared to the West. So for a typical deinstitutionalization, there's still a long way to go. And for the disadvantaged groups, give it people with disabilities or the elderly or other groups in the society, we fail to provide sufficient resources and support. And we see in recent years a lot of models like this, the co-living community. We need to be very cautious about this because the co-living situation may be a form of institution. And even though we cannot achieve deinstitutionalization in a short time, we can still explore the interventions possible and how to supervise or govern these alternate refuge or unregistered institutions so that we can reduce the level or extent of institutionalization. And we need to reflect upon the likelihood of becoming institutions unintentionally. And we also need to raise awareness from the general public so that we can learn more and we can continue to think about this. This wraps up my presentation. Thank you.
李一健先生、ありがとうございました。施設であることが見逃されがちな例に言及。
Thank you very much for the in-depth research regarding these alternative refuges. Next, we would like to ask Professor Motoyuko Goto to share with us on the presentation. I'm from the Ritsumeikan University. I am Motoyuki Goto. And my research is regarding the psychiatric treatment, medical treatment in Japan, especially after World War II. There is great demand for the psychiatric institutions. Why do we rely that much on private institutions, and why is it we still cannot get away from the needs for these private psychiatric institutions? Regarding deinstitutionalization, I want to focus more on how do we look at the history and also the policy of psychiatric medical treatment. First, regarding the history of these psychiatric care beds, this is the number for 2019. If we look at the number, the average in OECD is 28, where in Korea is 88, which is higher than OECD countries. But if you look at Japan, that number is really, really high. The psychiatric care beds is actually the highest. Japan has the highest psychiatric care beds in the world, and even to this day, not much has changed. This is the average length of stay in psychiatric care beds. The number for OECDs are actually small. I'm sorry about that, but I think normally for OECD countries, they're admitted for about 50 days, and for the Korea, it's also higher. In 2000, the average year is about 100. In 2011, it's about 100 days. But if you look at the Korean trend, it's like a global trend. But if you look at the number in Japan, the average in 2000 exceeds 350 days. In 2011, it's decreasing a little bit. However, the average length of stay compared to the global number is still quite high. And this slide shows the international comparison of psychiatric beds. If you look at European countries and the countries in the U.S., starting from the 1960s to the 1980s, we have these local psychiatric treatment mechanism. Because of the establishment of such mechanisms, the number of the psychiatric beds decreased. However, compared to the number, you will see an odd trend in Japan. Contrary to the decreasing trends in European countries and in America. Sorry, we may not be able to see this, but from 1960 to 1970s, there is a significant increase of psychiatric beds in Japan. And in 1950s to the 1970s, within these 20 years, the psychiatric beds in Japan and also the inpatients number increased. We need to look into it. Why is that there is such odd trend? So we look further into the circle that I've asked. Why is it within such a short period of time there is such rapid expansion of psychiatric beds? Also, what's the difficulty of the institutionalization in Japan? How do we understand this trend? First, I will want to look at the changes and evolutions of psychiatric beds. Before that, I have some previous studies that I want to share with you. In terms of the history of the psychiatry in Japan, we have to first look at the development of the Mental Hygiene Act. This Mental Hygiene Act, back then when Japan established this, it is actually to focuses more on public security. Because back then it focuses on the inpatient treatment of involuntary treatments, involuntarily committed patients. In the past, normal families would have a room where they lock the psychiatric patients. That would be what is normally done in everyday households. And this isolation history continues exist. This legacy continues exist and lives on. But these are more private mental hospitals. This means that the public responsibility was discarded. Let's look at the history of psychiatry in Japan. After 50 years, we can look at it from two aspects. First, for persons with mental disabilities, Japan wants to exclude them and out of public security concerns. Secondly, Japan lacks the public responsibility in treating these persons with mental disabilities. Instead, the public gives up, the public authority gives up and leave the role and the responsibility to private institutions. These are the two features, and this is just a linear historical perspective. If you see these continuous increasing trends, under this context, you can actually see a more complex reasons. And I would like to further divide it into three different types. I think this applies not only to Japan, it may also apply to other contexts. So let's look at these three types of psychiatric hospitalization and the changes within the history. The first one is the maintaining of public security. Second is social welfare. The other is treatment of the person with mental disabilities. Out of these three different hospitalization, there are overlapping factors. You will see that there is overlapping in between. For instance, if out of the needs for public security, it also includes social welfare. And of course, they are hospitalized because of treatment, but the focus sometimes is still more on public security concerns. Out of the three types that I just mentioned, I will first like to share with you the definition. First, regarding the public security type, the role is to prevent violence. Now, and it is mainly led by the government, so the admission was led by the government. Of course, then the fee would be basically covered by the public expenditure. For social welfare type is actually provide assistance to patients and their family, which would be the primary aim. The length of the stay would then be very long, and it would also be covered by public expenditure. If it's treatment, of course, the main aim is to cure the illness. And normally, since the goal is for treatment, the length of stays would be relatively short, but then that means that it needs to be partially or fully paid by the patients or their family. So this is how we define these three different types of hospitalization. Then how do we determine that after the admission of the patients, how do we decide which type they are? Take the example for Japan. We could look at how these expenditures is paid and covered by according to the law. If you look at the official documents and the medical documents, I look at some very old medical records. In the 1950s, the Ministry of Health and Welfare looked at thousands of psychiatric inpatients and conducted a survey. After a survey and analysis, they would determine the possible types of psychiatric hospitalization. I didn't share with you the number now, but I will skip that part. like I said, the idea of maintaining public order and public security, this would be an involuntary hospitalization led by the government. We can then we can say that this is a public security type of hospitalization. In Japan, we also have a public assistance act, where this would be provided by the government as well, covered by the government. But if it's a social insurance or private expenditures, these are normally paid by richer families, and of course the length of stay would be shorter. So we can then classify it as a treatment type. So we can look at these different type of hospitalization based on the different laws and regulations it is based on. So this is from the public statistics, and we can do some calculations based on these numbers. Basically, based on these different types of hospitalization, we can quantify the different types of psychiatric hospitalizations. After this analysis, how do we see these numbers? This is, we can see that the number of patients hospitalized continue to increase. And between 1950s to 1970s, as we discussed, this is the green line. The green line is between 1950s to 1970s. This is based mainly on the Public Assistance Act. The blue line, the blue dotted line, is actually hospitalized based on Mental Hygiene Act. Between 1950s to 1970s, there are a lot of people that are hospitalized or admitted because of Public Assistance Act. And also many of them are hospitalized because of Mental Hygiene Act, and this is because of public security concerns. Now, after such analysis, what we can find is that in 1950s to 1980s, there is little concerns over public security. Social welfare become the main type of reason for hospitalization. Why does this number suddenly increases? From the financial resources perspective, in the 1950s to the 1960s, the Public Assistance Act means that the expenditure would be covered by the government. And this means that the patient himself is normally of poverty because they are not able to pay for these expenditures, so the government needs to provide assistance. So what's the difficulty of deinstitutionalization in Japan? We could first identify these key. That is, social hospitalization because of social welfare are not able to achieve its aim. Senior persons with disabilities normally give up. So that's why we start to see this institution as like a social welfare institution. So this is the trend. Normally, we will start to see senior patients admitted because of age. Now, the public covers a majority of these expenditures. Then how do we identify these financial resources? The financial resources are spent mainly on providing assistance to the psychiatric hospitals. Currently, public security and treatments are not the main purposes, especially allowing these people to be admitted for free of charge, meaning that these financial resources will continue to be spent and allocated. But persons with disabilities and their families hope that they can actually be taken care of within their families. but that means that the family need to bear a higher burden of care. With the development of social welfare and social security, families who need to care for these patients would take the initiatives and prevent them from going into the hospital. They want them to be able to stay home for treatment.
Unfortunately, public funding like this has always been invested in psychiatric hospitals, so the resources are not shifted towards family members or family caretakers. In Japan, people always think that psychiatric treatment is a medical problem, but the care for psychiatric patients is a part of social welfare. It should be seen as a responsibility from the society and from the government. And Japan's psychiatric treatment policy should cover more than just the patient themselves, but also the family members, so everyone surrounding the patient. And that is something, that is why it's very difficult for Japan to deinstitutionalize. In contrast, family members in Japan, if they can take on the responsibility to care for patients with psychiatric illness, we can reduce the beds and long-term institutionalization in psychiatric hospitals, if that's possible. From the historical research that I conduct, I find that policy towards poverty has its own effect by the Japanese government. However, we need to continue to lessen the burden of the family members. That's a direction that we should head towards. Thank you. So judging from the historical viewpoint, we understood the historical context of the psychiatric institution in Japan and the history of deinstitutionalization in presentation by Goto. So next, we will invite Jun Yo-ok to speak. Are you ready?
はい、それではよろしくお願いいたします。
So please go right ahead. The floor is yours. Nice to see everyone. I am Jun Yo-ok from Guangzhou Independent Living Center for the Disabled. I am center director. I am also the chair for Independent Living Center for the Disabled. I thought to myself whether to live in an institution, but I met with many allies in this field, and I also, because of that, have the opportunity to meet with you. And I'm gonna talk about the progress of deinstitutionalization in Korea, the policies, and future prospects. And there are many things that we need to think about. One main focus is deinstitutionalization and what the policies are like. And we will look at the historical context, what kind of past that we had that would be covered in this presentation. In Korea, relevant systems and regulations were in place, but not a lot of people are able to live within their homes. That is an issue that we need to address now and in the future. Some people want to live independently, and there are also those who do not want to do so. And why are we helping people with disabilities? Is it because of poverty? Is it because of other needs? In Korea, even though regulations are in place, that's an act passed by the president. But in 2020, the Korean Congress discussed the act or legislation for deinstitutionalization, but the act failed to pass. And in 2022, there was a new policy in place. And this year, February this year, the new policy was abolished once again. Now, let's look at the current system. Please go to the next slide. Thank you. So, what's the current status of residential facilities? In Korea, we have different facilities that started from 1970s up until now. So there are incidents happened in Gwangju and Daegu. Many incidents happened or broke out from the news happened in these facilities. So we now have a narrower concept of deinstitutionalization, having patients or residents of these institutions leaving the institutions and live within the community. That is the narrow definition. In contrast, there is a wider definition, hoping to reduce the scale of the institution and improve the environment within the facilities. So what can we do to make the people with disabilities being able to live more independently? Currently in Korea, 5% of the population are people with disabilities. As of records in 2020, we can see that there are 1,539 residential facilities for people with disabilities. On average, residents live there for 18.9 years. And for short-term residents, the short-term facilities grew from 146 facilities to 157. And we also have several household residents, and there are 754 communal households for people with disabilities. And residents of these facilities, among them, 98.3% have severe disabilities. The average age for them is 39.4 years, and they live there on average for 18.9 years. Over 27% of the people want to leave these facilities and live independently. So the numbers on the slides are wrong, sorry. And because the Korean government have tax exemptions for the institutions, there is tax evasion happening in these facilities as well. We see in each city or municipality, they have their deinstitutionalized centers in place. For example, in Guangzhou and other areas, there are comprehensive resource centers for independent living of the disabled, and there are also resources for transitioning to alternative accommodations for people with disabilities. And local governments, some have policies on their own, some do not have. And that would affect the local communities to a great deal. For the local governments, their main focus, deinstitutionalization started in the previous administration. And the policy was for providing a more inclusive society where persons with disability can live independently. and also because the facilities I mentioned that there are tax evasion happening. So we really want to build a more comprehensive support system. And for the costs and expenses, we want the government to be able to fund these resources to help the people with disability to have financial independence, for them to participate in activities in the society. We want them to take a more active role in participation, and that is also the goal for local government support. So with such a policy in place and comprehensive planning, we want to head towards our goal. Currently in Korea, we amended the welfare regulations for people with disability, and we also established deinstitutionalization resource centers. And we also have public supported accommodation or residence. And we also expand the scope of support in these independent living centers. To help persons with disability to live independently within the community, we started setting up criteria and review system for residential facilities and household facilities. We want to provide more diversified housing situation for people with disability for them to choose from. And we want to reduce the scale of institutions into smaller or more diverse facilities. In terms of management for the smaller facilities, the residents would have a wider range of choice and option. So that's policy started up until 2022. And the new administration started in 2023 with new policies. And as of the end of 2023, we are still maintaining the existing policies. Our goal is to have more people to live independently. Our goal is at least 600 people. And we aim to increase the resources proportionally according to the people with disabilities. And on the slide shows policies of deinstitutionalization in Korea, starting from local governments. It seems positive, but some policies put out by local governments, municipal governments, are no different, or there's not much progress compared to the previous or older policies and the former administration. And we are now discussing whether the policies in place can reduce tax evasion from these institutions and facilities. And so we are shifting away from this term of deinstitutionalization. We want to emphasize independent living, and we are thinking about the strategies ahead as well. In other words, the priority of the policies were shifted from deinstitutionalization to independent living. and we now provide public housing. And in these public housing, we need to provide facilities or equipment suitable for people with disabilities. So these public housing is, in a sense, a smaller scale of institution. We want to better support people with disabilities so that they can live independently within their communities.
개별 방과 공간, 공유 공간이나 그런
So we would provide housing like in a household with 3 rooms where the people with disability can live together.
주체.
We also have a single room. But in reality, they will still need some assisted facility in order for them to live in the community. While we're promoting deinstitutionalization, we need more resources in the communities so that they can have some infrastructure for persons with disabilities to live independently. Currently, we actually have a lot of resources supporting their independent living. Which means that this would be a small-scale institution, and of course, a lot of people will question that. But in any case, persons with disabilities has the right for independent living, and we try as much as possible to support them so they can live in the way that they choose. So to summary, we want to facilitate a full-scale deinstitutionalization, but to this end, if we look at some countries with better examples, such as Sweden, we will refer to these best practices and try to facilitate and promote. We believe that we need to allow persons with disabilities to live independently if they choose to. At the same time, we need to facilitate the support not only from the families but also from the general public. The overall environment and public awareness are also very important. I believe you are all aware of that. But currently, based on the OECD standards and benchmark, Korea has allocated a very few budget on this area, so we believe that we need to increase the budget in order to do its job. We believe that we need to increase more national budget to realize the institutionalization policy, be it people in the institution or in the society. Currently, we may have different opinions. What we need is to have more systematic support so that we can really facilitate this policy. During this process, we've had a lot of failures. But we can also learn from the lessons of other countries. We hope that we can further develop this policy and really realize full-scale deinstitutionalization. Thank you. Thank you for the latest updates on the policy of the state, and also explain to us on this small trial results. Thank you. Thank you for the sharing. Next. We would like to invite Han Yanxin to share with us. So I would like to talk about how can social organizations promote the improvement of public policies, a case study on the advocacy of the zero refusal policy for autistic children attending regular classes in Zhongzheng City. So in 2013, this was the first policy. With the introduction of this policy, gave more than 8,000 autistic children in Zhengzhou equal opportunities to receive compulsory education. Before that, they either stay at home and needed someone to accompany them to take care of them, or they would need to send to a nursing facility with high costs. However, after the introduction of the zero rejection policy, autistic children in Zhongzhou integrated class and special children's care center can go to school normally in ordinary schools, and this has set a good example to other central and western provincial capital cities and other cities in Henan province. Our research uses resource dependence theory as the analytical perspective and policy progress theory as the framework. We found that in the policy agenda stage, social organizations can take advantage of the intersection of problem sources, policy sources, and political sources to play the role of policy entrepreneurs and open policy windows. In the policy planning stage, relying on parent communities, integrated education experts, and other human resources through dialogue, seminars, publicity, research, and other needs, we can provide feasible policy plans, feedback, opinions. In the policy decision-making stage, the parent communities rely on to make joint suggestions to promote the policy suggestions. In the policy implementation stage, we rely on 5 strategic resources such as complaints and reports, warm gifts, and also honors and recommendations, suggestions, and proposals. The final policy evaluation stage relies on profession expertise of scholars and research reports. Before formally introducing the case, let's look at the context. The past decades has been a decade of obstacles and rapid progress in human rights of persons with disabilities in China, which is mainly reflected in 2 areas. The first is in the field of integration education, including the introduction of reasonable accommodation policies, and also the second is in the field of medical securities, represented by the inclusion of rare disease drugs in the medical insurance catalog. Previously, with the support of Professor Zhang Wanhong, I conducted research on the general college entrance examination for persons with visual disabilities. And I'm a frontline practitioner, so I'm quite familiar with these policies. But with the academic research, the difficulty is that you have to find a framework, theoretical framework to examine and sort out the entire process so you can have an effective dialogue. But it's not easy to find an accurate theoretical framework. You have to make adjustments. To analyze the general college entrance examination, I'm using the empowerment theory. In China, we call it empowerment Fuquan, but normally they didn't differentiate these 2 terms. In my research, I define empowerment as the effective granting of full protection of citizens' rights, including 2 levels of national systems and social recognition. I define empowerment as supporting the implementation of groups and individuals and expanding society impact through their own efforts. The research is from the perspective of social organizations and divides the policy initiatives into 7 stages. To analyze the reasonable accommodation, I use social movement theory to analyze why the persons with disabilities movements can arise, and especially in China. And also, I conduct a quantitative analysis and evaluate the use and effective of these advocacy tools. And exactly because of these 2 studies, I was invited by Professor Jin Wenxiao of Henan Normal University to jointly analyze the case of zero rejection policy. I think it's a good opportunity for me to learn about the parent organizations in the field of mental disabilities. And that's why I talk about this is a very important field in terms of the disability movement in China. The reason why we chose this case, firstly, because it's a representativeness. During this advocacy work, they use all tools except public interest litigation. And this is also a representative in its successful case. Because of accessibilities, we are familiar with relevant organizations such as Zhonghua Kindergarten, Jinfu Centers, and Rainbow Home. And the people in charge also trust them and are willing to review and describe the entire process. In this case, we use resource dependence theory and policy process theory. This is also the first application of these two theories applied in case studies in China. We also fine-tuned the theoretical framework. Taking resource dependence theory, for example, it has 4 basic assumptions. First, survival is the most important theme to organization. Second, completely autonomous organizations do not exist. To survive and develop, organizations need to obtain resources from external environments and rely on the key resources from external environment. But the assumptions are from the survival of an organization from the perspective of rational self-interest. They are not fully applicable to advocacy social work, especially grassroots organizations, because their first concern is not on the survival, but on the ability to promote policy changes. So even if the organization ceased to exist or is cancelled, they are okay with it because advocacy is their aim. Take the organization of parents of autistic children, for example. Their urgent need is for their children to be able to attend regular classes. Otherwise, the financial burden on the family would be too heavy and the children's growth would be a problem. It is precisely because of this that these parents came together and formed grassroots organization. Another adjustment is the type of resources. There is a clear difference between the resource the organization relies on for long-term survival and development or short-term resources required for policy advocacy. If we focus on the latter, whereas previous studies focus more on the former. The short-term resources that policy advocacy relies on includes first human resources advocacies, including community resources, scholar resources, media resources, etc. Secondly, strategic realizes as the advocacy methods relies on joint suggestions, applications of government information disclosure, dialogue of decisions, performance arts, public interest litigation, suggestion of performance from two suggestions, literature review, complaints and reports, etc. Now, with this, then the resources has the leverage to actually advocate for the changes. In terms, I also did analysis back then, but back then we didn't look at the resource reliance theory. In terms of the policy process theory, what is being applied on the Anderson's 5-stage theory, which is including policy agenda, planning, decision-making, implementation, evaluation. I look at this. So the policy planning solves the problem, whereas the policy decision-making solves the problem of when to do it, policy implementation on who to do it, whereas policy evaluation focuses on how it is done. So the participation of social organizations in the policy can be all round and all day. They can play their role at every stage of the way. In the introduction of introducing policy process theory allows us to take the policy itself as a research object and make long-term observations. Previous research only focuses on the early stages of policy change, with there's little coverage on the evaluation. And our research spans, as I said, over 10 years. Also, since I'm a frontline practitioner, so my research often focuses on social organizations. But in this study, I focus on the policy itself as my research object. The entire policy process can be divided into 5 stages. Next, I will give you examples of policy agenda and policy implementation. The policy agenda started in 2008 and ends at May of 2013. The policy position is actually a list of issues put before the government as the gatekeeper, as a navigator. The participation of social organizations in this process refers to gathering and leveraging various resources to make governments to pay attention to existence of this policy. So these organizations adopted 5 advocacy strategies to reflect their demands. At this stage, the resources they rely on include joint suggestions, key visits, rotating petitions, internal medias, etc. And the human resources they rely on including parent communications, journalists, public interest lawyers, and the experts. And after the information disclosure strategy, the Municipal Education Bureau had to face the demand, and the social organizations for the first time faced the government's response. And this plays a key role in promoting the policy agenda. At the policy agenda stage, the multi-source flow model can be explained on how this is put forward. When the issues, policy, and politics are mature and intersect with one another, these issues can be put into the policy agenda and the policy window would be open. In this case, these force comes from these policy entrepreneurs. And when it comes to the issue of regular autistic classes attending regular classes, grassroots social organization plays the role of policy entrepreneurs. From the perspective of this theory, 2013 is a critical node, whereas the flow politics and also political flows began to intersect. At the policy level, after the revision of the amendment in 2011, autistic children can now be recognized and attend regular classes.
Politically, China ratification of UN CRPD in 2018 emphasized protecting the rights of education for children with disability, prompting amendments to relevant disability regulations, while Mayor of Zhengzhou issued instructions on inclusive education for children with autism. Regarding a problem stream, the spread of UN CRPD increased awareness of parental rights, and the issue of children with autism lacking educational opportunities become more prominent. In Chinese, the policy window officially opened. And just as Xu Bing, the director of Jiefu Center, remarked, at that time everything converged, otherwise it wouldn't have happened so quickly. So in terms of policy implementation, that's the fourth stage, spanning from August 2013 to April 2022, which marks the end of our study. The policy implementation stage has long been overlooked, but American scholar Allison believes that in achieving policy goals, only 10% of success lies in policy formulation, while the remaining 90% depends on effective implementation. Many policies with great aspirations can easily lose direction during implementation, and with inadequate support can lead to more problems and inclusion in the name only. And to address these potential issues during implementation, social organizations adopted advocacy strategies to ensure genuine policy implementation while securing additional support. At this stage, the 5 advocacy strategies were used: complaints and reporting, compassionate gestures, honorary recognition, policy proposals, and community empowerment. And relying on the resources such as parent communities, parent representatives, and reporters. For social organizations engaged in policy advocacy, the early stages, particularly policy agenda stage, rely on more diverse advocacy strategies and human resources, after often adopting a more confrontational approach. In contrast, during the mid to late stages, policy implementation and evaluation, strategies become more precise, human resources more concentrated, and approach shifts towards working with the system. With a stronger focus on constructive engagement, the parent communities represented by grassroots social organizations need to participate throughout the entire process. And moreover, building on advocacy coalition depends on a strong sense of mission and genuine needs for social organizations. Previously, I wrote an article titled "Persons with Disabilities as Pioneers of Equal Human Rights," which considered the rights of reasonable accommodation and public participation in the disability fields as fundamental human rights, proposing that convenience is a right and participation is justice. The advocacy case for this zero rejection policy for children with autism in inclusive education serves as evidence and proof it was through active efforts and full participation of social organizations that the rights of education for children with autism are truly protected. This research aims to document history, influence the future, and realize human rights. And that wraps up my presentation. I am very grateful for the organization. Thank you.
すみません。ハン先生オンラインでしたがご報告いただきましてありがとうございました。学校だったり教育という場に注目しながら理論。
Thank you to our presenter. So, in practice, in school, in theory, in government, two have to go in hand to achieve this result. So, thank you for your presentation. And next, we will invite Wang Yihui as a discussant.
谢谢。好，大家好。
Hello, everyone. I feel like I'm more accustomed to holding my mic. I am Wang Yihui from Xinglu Foundation. And I don't know why I'm so nervous today. Perhaps it's because that we have so many PhD students and teachers and professors here. So I feel like I am taking a class in a university, and that makes me really, really nervous. I just spoke with Commissioner Wang Rongzhang of National Human Rights Commission. I have instructed him to give me a warm smile to support me during my discussion. So from our previous presenters, they spoke about the experience in respective countries and the current status of deinstitutionalization or the hiccups that they encounter. And me, from Xinglu Social Welfare Foundation, as a worker in the field, I'd like to share our ideas about deinstitutionalization. So my title is Eliminating Institutions. Means that in this journey, it is progressive. It's not something we can achieve within a short time. And it also shows that this issue, there are so many stakeholders within this issue, and their interpretation may be different for the same issue. First, allow me to give you some background information. So this is issued by Ministry of Health and Welfare in 2012. That is a report on the living conditions and needs of people with disabilities. And 91% of people with disabilities live at home, and 7.83% people reside in care institutions. So among the residents of care institutions, 11.82% live in facilities for persons with disabilities, and that is also my field of expertise. And among individuals with intellectual disabilities, 73% of the residents reside in facilities for persons with disabilities. So due to multiple reasons, the parents or persons with disabilities themselves would choose to live in these care institutions. And let's look at the stats as of the end of 2023. There are 266 institutions with a service capacity of 21,000 people. And 80% of people are actually being served. Among them, 167 institutions are full-time residential facilities, serving 15,345 individuals. So for all these full-time facilities, some are large-scale institutions, some are smaller-scale or medium-scale facilities. But the majority of these institutions are located in remote areas, and most institutions but there are still quite a few institutions in the urban area close to communities as well. And mental disability or intellectual disability accounts for the majority of the residents we serve, and with age between 18 to 45. And what's the current status of community-based services for people with disability? As of 2023, there are locations or centers for community-based services with a capacity of 18,000 individuals. And with government policies in place, the goal is to extend to 1,663 locations by 2028, serving nearly 29,000 individuals. In particular, 2,083 centers or locations are community residential services. So we can see that the government is really trying to expand the scope of services, but it's still far from sufficient. On the other hand, on the admission criteria for residents, mostly for moderate to severe disabilities, including intellectual or physical disabilities. And for physical disabilities, they're in care facilities. So there is a criteria in place that needs demand assessment or needs assessment before being sent or being admitted to the institutions. However, the way of implementation or the effectiveness is just another story. That's something worth thinking about. And next, let's look at the operators, the voice of those who run institutions when we talk about deinstitutionalization. Because a lot of people who run these institutions, they take on the society's needs and take on these people, caring for these people with disabilities, even without resources. And many caretakers take care of disadvantaged families. And that doesn't have a lot of family support system. That is why they need the support of these institutions, even without government resources. So the operators or the managers of the institutions actually stepped up. So a lot of parental groups or social groups, or such as Xinlu Welfare Foundation, we started out from the goal of social care, and some groups also have a religious belief and helping the society in mind. So other than caring for the families with disadvantage, and some may notice incidents within the community, individuals may have emotional behaviors, or they are more likely to be excluded from the society or from the communities. Those individuals will be sent to these institutions. So when we deal with deinstitutionalization, we need to help accommodate to the journey or the emotional aspects of those who run these institutions. And also we need to address the expectations of family care in Taiwanese society and culture. We often see in the news that when adults, not necessarily with disability, when they make mistakes or do something wrong, the journalists or the media would always go to their parents to say that, oh, do you want to apologize for your children? Do you want to take responsibility for your children? So the society's expectation towards parents is still too high. And the parents of people with disabilities have their own expectations on their own, and they still bear the expectation from the society, and that's a lot of pressure put on parents. An institution as a relatively safer environment that can assure parents, in a sense, and the parents feel that they can have themselves and their children live the life of their own. So in dealing with or progressing towards deinstitutionalization, we need to address the feelings of the parents as well. Also, in terms of safety, so what's the balance between safety and autonomy? A lot of managers of institutions and parents face this dilemma, especially in deinstitutionalization. So how do we balance between the two, and which should take priority? And that is a huge issue. It's really problematic because we often hear that those people with disability, when they live at home, not in the institutions, but because they often cause trouble in the community, sometimes borrow money from other people, or there's sexual harassment. So the people with disability are often locked in their homes by their parents or by their caretakers and family members. So that still happens, not in institution, but in family situations. So that is the current situation. So a lot of like-minded allies, like Sinlu Social Welfare Foundation, we want to provide human-oriented, person-centered services. We want to adjust our services. As I mentioned, SPQ. So we want to support the individuals of service. We want to support their personal needs. And we want to improve their quality of life. And we also hope that even within institution, we still want to deinstitutionalize care. So an institution may be a safe environment for these residents, but the service or the care that we provide within these institutions, the software, so to speak, should be individualized and providing options.
That's why at Sindu, we often think that how do we provide more assistance to our supporters so that these people can actually live within the communities. We have a rebuild centers where within these centers we will help them to make options, will help them to be responsible to their lives and have their life skills so that they can more smoothly live within the community. Because just as I mentioned, many people, if they live inside their household, they're not empowered because many of the person with intellectual disabilities during their growing up, they don't know what options they have. I once spent 30 minutes at 7-Eleven who lived within their household for a long time trying to decide what breakfast he wants to have because he never had a choice before. His mother does all the work. So throughout this process, it's a journey. It's a journey of learning. It's a journey of cultivating. We also have an innovative community living services, serving people who live within the community so that they would not need to be that dependent living in the household. And they also increase the possibility for them to live independently outside. So it seems that we can see a promising future in the near future. For instance, in terms of the resources, we should start to build more community services so we can have more diverse options. And these resources can be more inclusive. That is, they are allowed to be with everyone else. And also, these institutions are no longer just institutions. It, of course, requires a safe and secure environment. It may be a safe environment, but at least within that environment, it is not an institutionalized service. Also, at the same time, we hope to provide the individualized assistance based on the individualized needs. But of course, there are challenges. One big challenge is regarding the boundaries of responsibility. Who exactly has the responsibility? Do we put the responsibility mainly on the parents and on the supporters? Should this responsibility be shared within the entire society, or maybe the persons with disabilities themselves also need to bear a certain responsibility? Through the process of empowerment, it's also quite challenging because when we are teaching a kid how to go to school, we are bearing all these risks. Maybe problems of traffic, there may be problem of getting lost, there may be problems of getting kidnapped by a bad person. There has been all these different risks, but when this risk happens, who needs to be responsible? Who needs to be liable? Can we have a support system that bear and share this responsibility? Next is regarding a super-aged society. By 2026, we are going to enter into a super-aged society. The impact of this super-aged society is that we will also see more and more senior citizens. This means that there are more people that needs to be taken care of. Of course, there would be an impact on these persons with disabilities. Yes, of course, there would be some resource competition from that. And also because of the aging society, the resources would also be, the talent and the labor would decrease. So with this labor shortage, what should we do? Last but not least, I want to talk about communication within the society. Is our society ready to welcome and accept these persons with disability coming out of these institutions? This requires a lot of effort. Next is the next steps. What can we do next step? We can evaluate the definition of institutions. Is it a service or is it a physical environment? Secondly, these resources within the community, they need to really meet the individual needs of persons living in the institutions and not just something that we imagine out of nowhere. Thirdly, regarding the needs assessment, we need a more rigorous process. Fourthly, do we still need to maintain a certain percentage of full-time residential institutions to take care of maybe a senior person with disabilities or people with a more intensive needs? But of course, these institutions need to be community-based and more small-scale and more integrated into their daily life. Sorry for the delay. We have a very good weather outside. Just bear with us for a few hours and you can enjoy the beautiful Taipei. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Executive Director Wang, for the suggestions. I think we have 10 more minutes. First of all, for our 4 speakers, I just want to ask you, do you have any responses regarding the Deputy Executive Director's suggestion? If not, maybe we can open the floor for questions. Any questions from the floor? Thank you, presenters, for the wonderful speech. I want to ask something regarding the psychiatric disabilities in Japan, in Korea, in Taiwan. What's the percentage of the persons with mental disabilities that can be taken care? Because I think in the U.S., only less than 60% of them are identified and diagnosed and getting the treatment that they need. I want to know the situation in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. Secondly, regarding independent living, this is a very ideal situation. But of course, I do believe that it requires a lot of organizations and labor in order to achieve that goal. Because for persons with mental disabilities, they may also have other chronic diseases that requires different organizations and NGOs to support each other. I'm not sure if in Japan or Korea you have these cross-organizational experts or, for instance, persons with mental disabilities may also have maybe other physical diseases. And how do we support one another? Do you have other ideas so that the quality of treating persons with mental disabilities can be improved? I want to know what you think about this. Thank you. Thank you for your question. First is regarding the percentage and the number of persons with mental disabilities that can receive the treatment that they need. Second is for patients with mental disabilities, what kind of support we can give them. So maybe we can ask our presenter to respond. First is regarding the number of persons with mental disabilities. Well, I don't know the detailed number. have you devoted in psychiatric treatment? Do you mean care alone or invest in resources for psychiatric care? Can you be more specific? What type of resources what kind of treatment do you mean? Do you refer to a more comprehensive care? Because the word care may also include having a caregiver, a caretaker inside the house, or they need to be treated within a hospital. What are you referring to? Yeah, I mean persons with depression or schizophrenia, for mental diseases like this. Some of them have medical records, some of them being identified of such needs. There are also people that may not be identified. The percentage in Japan is less than 60%. I just want to know what's the number like in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. What's the percentage of hidden mental disabilities? And also, if this is going to the trend is going to be higher and higher, how do you have a cross-organizational connections to provide a more comprehensive care to persons with mental disabilities? Thank you. For treatment, my understanding is that I just answered what I understand. In Japan, take persons with depressions who has been treated. The treatment they receive is not that comprehensive. Also with persons with schizophrenia, many of the Japanese people are unwilling to go to hospitals and receive treatment. But at the same time, there are also people who are active in receiving the treatment. In psychiatry, normally they provide medication. Therefore, will patients receive a reasonable treatment? I think it's hard to distinguish because everyone have their own options. But in Japan, they also have this long stay of hospitalization problem. So once you are hospitalized, you will stay there for a long time. It's hard to have a clear number for it. Thank you. I want to also ask if the other two presenters can also briefly respond to the questions. Regarding the questions that you asked, I think it's a more complex issue because mental disabilities is a huge spectrum, whereas depression and schizophrenia are two very different types of diseases. But I had a number. There are 2.8 million people who had visited the psychiatry department, whereas there are over 126,000 people with the disability certificate. And we have around 32,700 beds. So it requires a assistance other than hospitals. Currently, we have like also have a social security network social safety net. But I think we have public numbers what you can refer to, and it is published by the government. For the situation in Korea, we have local independent living centers that supports such care. Such local centers will help persons with disabilities to achieve independent living. Last year, we have a new policy.
We also help these people with disabilities for employment. So according to our survey to the actual needs, 1,780 people with disabilities, regardless, we surveyed their physical health and this experience with discrimination. And the results of the survey, among the interviewees, half of the people respond that the survey is positive and helpful for them. Thank you. We also had other attendees raising their hands to ask questions. Well, we have a Q&A session later as well, so perhaps we, because of the delay, so we will leave the questions for later. Thank you. Thank you to our presenters and discussants for your brilliant discussion. We will now have a break for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. So please come back at 3:10. Please come back at 3:10. And we have refreshments that need to be consumed within 2 hours, so please enjoy them very soon. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. If you can, please be seated. I am Chunyu Kaya. To allow me to introduce in English so that our next presenter knows they're gonna go.
Welcome to our panel session. I'm Kaya Chiu, and I'll be moderating today's discussion on the current states and challenges of supported decision-making and accessibility in East Asia. We have a very exciting lineup of speakers today, each offering a very unique perspective on this important topic. We will begin with Professor Cho and her team, who will compare personal assistance services in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. They'll highlight each model's strengths and weaknesses and examine how these services support or hinder independent living for people with disabilities. Professor Cho, the floor is yours for the next 15 minutes.
The microphone is not on. The interpreter cannot interpret. The microphone is not on. The microphone. I have co-authors from Korea and Japan, Dr. Senyong Cho and Toshi Ueno. and Chen Bo-wei. And if you hear me make any mistakes, feel free to correct me. So, to extend from the Korean presenter of the previous session saying that for people with disability, helping us to achieve independent living is really important. We want to make our own decision. We want to be we want to decide who will be our personal assistant. We want to be able to choose our way of living and what kind of assistance we want to receive, and the training for PA. So the Article 19 of CRPD stipulates the state's obligation to promote services for persons with disability. And before CRPD was passed, Sweden, back in 1994, passed an act on personal assistance, the LSS. So that is a pivotal moment in the area, stating that countries must bear the largest responsibility, and the government will subsidize in cash, providing persons with disability to choose personal assistance on their own, and this contain the scope of people with mental disabilities. And the scope of assistance include living at home and leisure and social activities, and the funding comes from tax. And because of Sweden, other Scandinavian countries were inspired by Sweden, including Denmark and Norway, also passed the laws in later years. So Scandinavian countries, there are lots of comparisons among Scandinavian countries. And then a lot of comparison studies for European countries and comparison for North America and Europe occurred as well. However, for such comparison studies, Asia is lacking. No scholars compare Asia's situation with other countries yet. So within this research, we want to explore the situation in Asia, what kind of funding, what kind of services are provided, assistance are provided, how can we deliver. So we want to adopt a research with 4 policy aspects by Gilbert and Grill, deciding who are the ones receiving such services, who is and how to provide such services, how to deliver such services, including funding. So the research question is that we want to look at 3 countries, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, to see if there are any similarities and differences. And we want to start from the perspectives of the persons with disabilities and their subjective experience and the effect towards helping them living independently. So our methods is use semi-structured interview as well as documentary research. So we focus on Taipei, Seoul, and Tokyo. We interview 10 persons with disability each that have personal assistance. So briefly, allow me to introduce the PA system in Japan. So independent living movement emerged back in 1980s with the public sector providing budget for PA. So the first city was in Osaka in 1986. The regulations then were not a separate law, unlike Sweden. There are different laws in different areas, including disability welfare regulations and community service support, etc. But there is a co-payment, but unlike Sweden. So the co-payment is around 10% for non-low-income households. As of last year, 2023, in Tokyo, 310 individuals received 24-hour PA services. that account for 0.04% of all people with disabilities in Tokyo. And there's an odd thing about Japan, or a more interesting thing about Japan, that in Sapporo City, since 2010, there is direct payments in cash for PA system. That's more similar to Scandinavian country model. But the current challenge is that it's not a state-run PA system, it's a municipal system. Now let's look at Korea. Independent living movement began in the year 2000. And as of 2005, the movement became nationwide. And in 2010, like Japan, there is like Sweden, there is a separate law for personal assistance. And that is also in 2011. It is also more similar to Sweden that the funding comes from state pension. So in Seoul, as of 2022, there are 400 people with disabilities that use 24-hour PA services out of 392,000 people. And the current challenge is the integration with long-term insurance and care. And for Taiwan, the new Vitality Independent Living Association of Taipei, established in 2007. And in 2009, there is a Asia Tri campaign advocating for independent living. So there is a pilot trial in 2012 for a 2-year period of independent living. So in 2012, Taiwan passed the Independent Living Support Services. That's put in the Regulations of Personal Care and Disability Act. And there are so many challenges that I don't have enough time to list them all. So one would be we cannot provide 24-hour PA, unlike Japan and Korea. And also, that's something we still need to continue working on. We have a high percentage of co-payment, 30%. So that's a huge burden for people with disabilities. And due to time constraints, I'll jump to the last table of the slides. You don't have that in your brochure, so that's updated. And all the interview results, please refer to your handouts. And allow me to pull that table that I want to talk about.
最新的档，所以我刚才觉得资料是怪怪的。那现在怎么办？
What to do? They don't have the table that I want to present. I had updated a version late last night, but I suddenly don't know what to do.
现在就是用我自己的 PPT。
Okay, allow me to use my own file.
这个照相机可以照我的 laptop 吗？可以吗？你可以来。
Can the camera look at my screen? Look at my laptop, or how can I project my screen? Oh, so for our attendance, let's take the time. Okay, I'll just show you the table here. I have listed out all the 4 domains with the comparison among 3 countries. So among the 3 countries, we conduct a survey on who's the recipient of the services. So all people with disability. In Korea, that's age between 6 and 65. In Taiwan, that's between 18. That should be above 18 years old. And if you have migrant care worker, then you can now apply for personal assistant. And there's something noteworthy. We now have the power. For those who have the power to change policies in Taiwan, please listen to me now. We need to learn from Japan's example in criteria review. In Japan, they review the needs and the severity of disability. In Korea, their review is even more advanced. They follow the principle of ICF. So they review severity of disability and even the environment. And that's classified between 1 to 15. In Taiwan, the disability is only 1 to 4. And Taiwan also needs to submit an independent living plan. And for the option between social participation, so in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, there is no direct payment, unlike European examples. And Sapporo City is an exception with direct payment since 2010. So in Korea, voucher is used. So compare Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. From our research, we learned that in Tokyo and in Seoul, you have access to 24-hour services, but in Taipei, there is no 24-hour service available. And then next, for service delivery. In Japan, co-payment is less than 10%. And there is a ceiling for costs, maximum of $260. You cannot exceed that. And in Korea, co-payment is, in the US, co-payment is around 4% to 6%. And in Taiwan, co-payment is 30%. And the Ministry of Health and Welfare promised to reduce the co-payment to 24%. But 24% is still way higher than 10% or 4%. So we have a higher co-payment. And then the next, all 3 countries outsource the services to NGOs or NPOs by local governments. And I'm about to wrap up. To convert into new Taiwanese dollars by the standard of 2024 in Japan's Ministry of Health and Welfare statistics. So independent living within the community and living within the community for persons with disability, their budget is, I'm gonna speak in English.
USD OK， 所以它是113
11.3 billion US dollars. So that's 360 billion NTDs. So that's only for independent living within the community. So for Japan, there are 9.6 million persons with disabilities. So each individual can have 1,174 US dollars. So they get to receive 38,000 NT dollars. Okay, so for Korea, that's 1.5 billion US dollars. In conversion, that would be 4.8 billion NT dollars. And because Korea has 2.6 million persons with disabilities, so each individual can be allotted 18,000 NT dollars. Okay, so in comparison, Taiwan's budget for this year for independent living, that's 90 million NT dollars for PA. So what's the budget per capita? I forgot the US dollar of the number, but we have 1.2 million people with disabilities. So each individual can receive 82 NT dollars. So Japan's budget is 2 times of Korea and 470 times of Taiwan. That wraps up my presentation.
提跟 differences 我就不讲了。好，那以上是我今天的分享。
Thank you, Professor Cho. Although we do have a little bit of technical glitch, it's still a very insightful presentation. Next, we will have Professor Otani, who will delve into the intersection of supported decision-making and accessibility using the example of euthanasia and death with dignity. Her presentation will explore how to ensure people with disability have autonomy and have a voice in end-of-life decision. それではこの後の15分間は小谷先生の発表となります。よろしくお願いします。
はい。こんにちは。立命館大学の
Hello, everyone. I am Izumi Otani from Ritsumeikan University. 40 years ago, I started teaching life and ethics education in high school, and I was so shocked by one of the answers by the students. The students with severe disabilities decided they want to die with dignity, and the society's ability to accept that shows progress in the society. I was shocked about this. That is why I am studying the decision of life and death decision making. And for me, several years ago, because of accidents, I become a wheelchair user. And I also am a recipient of care services, so I also conduct accessibility and feasibility research in this front as well. And today, I'll talk about social work and the relation between movies and TV drama to think about how to have a more dignified death, and what is a support of life and death decision making? What does it mean? And people with disabilities.
People with disabilities, when they face the supported decision in terms of life or death, what channels do they have? Which information do they can they get from? And when they are making the decisions, what kind of information would they send out? And who would be the one receiving that information? And how can this information be received? And for persons with disabilities, when I'm making a life or death decision, where and when and how would they connect with others? More precisely, in summer, there was something happened. This is a case regarding a murder case of a female ALS patient. So they were commissioned by the murder of this person 15 minutes after these female patients was committed, taken these medications. The father was also the murder of the father of the defendants was also found. So both cases being intentional and confirmed killing of two doctors. And with this case, we want to focus more on these cases, especially on these two cases. They have the intention to kill, and for LAS patients. And also the covered by the media, and for every media, the doctors see these, the public see these doctors as heroes. Now, a person who actually audited and participated in the trial, and that article of the observation was published in the magazine, and there was also media presentation there, so you can also refer to that. On June 2nd of 2019, NHK Special also has a program said She Chose Euthanasia. I think this victim saw this program and decided to make this decision. So I've also made some publications out of this. So today I will focus on this topic. This documentary actually talks about a person with mental disability. She, along with two sisters, went to Switzerland, and accept the assisted death by a doctor. In the documentary, clearly shows how he chose eventually to die. The Independent Living Center in Japan actually submitted to the NHK and made an announcement of assisted suicide. And Independents living in Japan also submitted announcements to the BPO and NJK, saying that this will help the committing suicide, and the number for committing suicide would increase. And we also asked the JSDT board to respond to this, but our request was never responded by BPO. Only NHK responded to our request once. The documentary at the later stage was also aired several times, and currently on NHK On Demand, you can also watch it. Here I would like to talk about in 1949, this is a German video called German video called in 1941, but this person would lose his sight and also lose his hearing ability, or not be able to recognize her own husband. She hoped that her husband will kill her before that. Thomas, who committed the suicide, said that I kill my wife out of love. Does that mean that I committed a crime? This film is called I Accuse. So this is a very restricted film in Germany, so it's not easy to find the source. However, similar stories has been shown, and many films also shared similar topics. This is a film in 2004 called $1 Million Baby. It talks about a lady who ran out of a slum, but then in 30 seconds and become a successful person. And she broke her neck in a competition and hoped that her coach would kill her. Ultimately, the coach decided to also perform euthanasia with that person. And people would feel that the actual situation of the disease was not portrayed very clearly. So the person with disabilities group and also the Christian religious groups also protested. However, this movie received many awards. And there's also a person who studied abroad. She also harmed because of this. She said that I wanted to see the film because I want to get some hints about living in a tough situation, but it feels like I was given a death sentence. I don't want this as the ending of this film. So this is the work of this director Yamamoto Mizuko. So 20 years later, after she saw the film, she made a film called Maelstrom. Maelstrom actually received a lot of awards and was even elected as Nippon Collection 2022, and also many different other film festivals. And it was also filmed. It was also aired in many different film festivals, and it was also screened in a small cinema in Tokyo. I would like to introduce this film. So, for instance, this is a big boat with a lot of able-bodied people come and go freely, but I'm still drifting alone in a rolling boat, not knowing where I'm going. But even with such a body, if I don't return to expressing myself on my own axis, slowly I will die. A reluctance to avoid stairs is out of the question, and he continued to struggle trying to find him as herself as an expressor. So this is what the director wants to say. As a person in wheelchair user will want to avoid taking stairs. We feel that this is a very passive expression. So what it needs is actually a willingness to convey the means to transport the wheelchair in the minimum words and the ability to express gratitude. So she's tired of asking for help and wants to look for a place where she could go in on her own. So these are all wheelchair users. Whenever they see stairs like this, they would be able to relate to their own situations. So through beautiful images, they're able to have their feelings expressed. She also has other works, and she also includes works from other persons from Denmark. In addition to understand these, we also look different from other people, and there are also people with mental disabilities, so we have the obligation to step outside and meet people and let them know that we're all people, just like other human beings. Next, I would like to introduce some persons with disabilities and some actual cases. For instance, Ms. Lin from the Vitality Independence Living Association, she said that because of the battery issue in her electric wheelchair, she is not able to catch the plane. And this case was also covered by the media, and I think Ms. Lin is now here also with us. Another case is it's also a similar case. A wheelchair user who is an influencer. Her name is Nakajima Roko. She said that in the movie theater, because she want assistance from the staff, she was blamed and. For her post, people say that you are a parasite on the able-bodied working class. Stay at home. This is actually a way to that supports euthanasia, and we think that, but such statements continue to be seen outside of the Nazi regime. But even with that, Nakajima Roko continued to communicate with the cinema owner, and she also continued to promote the rights of persons in wheelchair. Now she has her activities as a wheelchair influencer. Next, I would also like to share with some new development. This is a TV drama called Life with Disability. This was aired in 2023 to 2024. The brother has Down syndrome, and in high school they lost their brother, and her mother is in wheelchair, where their grandmother has dementia. So this is actually based on a real story. In this TV drama, the patient with Down syndrome is actually played by an actual Down syndrome patient. You can see that this is the co-living places, the group homes that they lived in. They are all Down syndrome patients. And also the workplace of the main character, they work in a Lupe. Lupe is also a workplace with many persons with disabilities, and many of the peoples are shown. So Lupe as a group is actually would actually organized a group organized by students from Rikuse University, and this is called another TV drama is called 0%, and this is based. This is the main character is a person with disability. Social issues and entertainment are now both aired and discussed in this TV drama. And this is another TV drama. It's called Tora ni Tsubasa. This is actually based on the first female lawyer in Japan. All these cases are actual cases happened in Japan. For instance, one of the cases talks about Article 14, where everyone is equal in front of the law, and there will be no discrimination because of religions and other things. What we also want to mention is that Article 14 failed to mention disability. Also, Article 13 mentions that we need to respect a person's individual and their right to pursue happiness. Right to pursue happiness is seen as a new right and is actually constitute the right to self-determination. So, in the same time, Article 14 also regulates that all of the people are equal before the law, but the disability or impairment ideal is lacking. So this shows how ableism is actually seen under the Japanese Constitution. Also, since we're not able to protect their survival rights, there has been this huge gap of economic status. So currently, we have a film who is actually portraying the future of Japan. This is called Plan 75. Plan 75 means that when people reach 75 years old, the word 75 is shown very vaguely. So this means that these people will continue to be expanded. When you are communicating with young people, they can gradually find some small hope.
Going back to my original slides, for persons with disability, when it comes to making life and life decisions, what can we help them in supporting their decision making? What kinds of information we can access? Where can we access? And when they make decisions, how they can express it, how can they express it who they can express towards. So for us, feels like accessibility is something that connects people with disabilities to the society. And it's also the same for employment opportunities. Give it opportunities for education, employment, or other aspects. There is a huge obstacle between people with disabilities and the entire society. We need to offer support, but what kind of support? Where can people receive support, seek support? And these are the things that we need to think about when we try to assist people with disability to make life and death decisions. So if you're interested in my lecture, feel free to read my articles that I wrote in the past. Thank you.
A question to ask, is it a right? Is it a real choice? Now let's shift our attention to Korea, where Mr. Kim Kang-won will provide a detailed analysis of the country's supported decision-making landscape. He will discuss the existing legal frameworks and identify areas for improvement. So Mr. Kim, the floor is yours.
예, 안녕하십니까. 저는 한국에
Hello, everyone. I am Kang-won Kim from Korea. I am the Deputy Director at Public Interest and Human Rights Center. And I'd like to share several recent incidents with you. Just 2 days ago, the Grand Court of Korea, there was a lawsuit filed regarding the needs for accessibility for people with disabilities. And for this litigation, there are some oral debates that are public. And the lawsuit states that the country doesn't provide enough accessibility, such as ramps. And the Korean government is sued for lack of accessibility. So if the government claims that to ensure accessibility, there would be high expenses, and they need to also think about the safety of persons with disabilities. When persons with disabilities want to buy something in the mall, they need to access buildings, and the government's claim is that they can have other people help them or to purchase online. So there is an oral debate on this, and the Grand Justice response was shocking to us. One of the Grand Justices said that, you think the rights of the persons with disability can be replaced like this? So the Grand Justice showed such surprise. And from the general public, around 50 to 70% of the people say that we will commit to protect your rights. But at this moment, only 3 to 5% of all buildings in Korea are barrier-free and accessible. So the things stated during the oral debate was shocking. And all of our efforts in conquering such challenges is really important. So this lawsuit was filed in 2017. So after 7 years, there's a lot of discussion and progress made. A lot of groups of persons with disabilities, they even put up performances to raise awareness.
적인 태도는 아니었을 것이라고 생각을 합니다.
To be honest, not even the Grand Justices were supportive of the rights of people with disabilities in terms of accessibility. It's through the efforts of such advocacy that we can raise awareness and have more people understand our rights. But there's still a lot of troubles or problems at hand. So for today's topic, I'm going to talk about the current situations of supported decision-making in Korea. That is, so this issue is similar to accessibility, that we have UN guidelines and standards stipulating that the government has its responsibility, the country and the society needs to have supportive systems. And the government states that, oh, we do want to do so, but the society still lack awareness and understanding. And in 2013, Korea amended the civil code and introduced an adult guardianship system into Korea. And the groups led by parents of people with development disabilities, such groups advocate that we need to have this adult guardianship in place to safeguard the property or the financial security of people with disabilities, because these parents worry that when they pass away, no one were there to care for their children. So with adult guardians, we can divide the guardianship according to the severity of disability. In fact, many people with disabilities are under adult guardianship.
네, 그래서 2014년에 이어서 2022년
Therefore, since 2013, the UN also addressed Korean government, constantly urging Korean government to make changes to eliminate alternative decision making. The UN constantly repeats such encouragement and urging the government to take actions, but there is little done. whether it's the government or the society, there's still a lot of people do not understand why we would need supported decision making. For me, I feel like it's more than just a policy issue or a systematic issue. It's also a social issue because there's still lack understanding within the society. And advocacy groups for persons with disabilities, they're currently trying to establish a system for supportive decision-making, and they're conducting research to support this. And I am also involved in those research. And we compare the systems in Western countries in terms of supported decision-making and identify the items or policies that Korea can adopt. We need more applicable content. However, as of today, we can still only, these examples can only serve as a reference for us. For me, what supportive decision-making means and what can we do to achieve it, that is the priority or the main focus of my research.
또한 그 지원의사 결정 제도.
We need to have a comprehensive system to support and to have subsidies in place. And we need to respect the wishes of persons with disabilities, what kind of support they want to receive. And this is only the least that we can do for them. We need to respect their wishes. In some countries, interventions are conducted in courts, and in some countries, CSOs are the ones pushing for this. Before I conduct this research, I feel that the adult guardianship in Korea is completely alternative decision-making, and it should be completely eradicated. However, when I look at the examples of other countries, and I notice that the contract of guardianship can be a basis for supportive decision-making. We want to increase the specified or partial guardianship so that we can reduce overall or blanket adult guardianship. And we also want to have public-run guardianship as social services. And we also need to understand persons with disabilities and what kind of challenges they face when making decisions on their own, and what kind of supportive measures we can take to help them find out what they want and to be more human-centered in providing our support. And going forward, we need some legal basis for the systems. In Korea, several years ago, the discussion on adult guardianship emerged. However, so far, there is no concrete conclusion yet. We need pilot programs to support future policies and to develop our service models. If we don't understand what it is as supportive decision-making, there's no way for us to provide it. So we need to come up with more concrete plans on how to proceed, and we also need written regulations to support our practice. And we need to have ready-to-use brochures and handbooks. We need to educate the general public to change people's minds, to raise awareness. And lastly, I want to say that supported decision-making in itself in Asian countries, because we are more of countries with a collective culture, individualism is less prominent compared to Western countries. So most countries, we don't feel the urge or need and the importance of supported decision-making. So this movement is actually challenging the traditional values in Asia. For example, people with disabilities, especially development disabilities or intellectual disabilities, we need to change people's awareness and impression on them, and to improve the rights and to guarantee their rights compared to Western countries. Asian countries' efforts on supportive decision-making is still lacking and insufficient. We need to find measures consistent with our values to come up with more concrete plans for supported decision-making. And that wraps up my presentation. Thank you. I will switch back to Chinese because the next presenter will be in video. So we have learned so much from our previous presenters, and we will pass the time to Associate Professor Yu Lian of School of Public Health at Xi'an Jiao Tong University, and she talked about suspension integration to co-evolution.
那么我这个研究呢，其实更多的是
My research focuses more on medical experiences of persons with disabilities and their subjective feelings. Persons with disabilities, what kind of obstacles they face. We found that actually the situation is not very optimistic. First of all, in terms of when we are recruiting the participants, some of them will say that I don't go to the hospitals, which is quite a surprise. We'll feel that it's not because they are actually very healthy and do not need treatment. It's just because it's hard for them to receive medical treatments. But of course, the majority of them still go to the hospitals, but they want to reduce the frequency of going to the hospitals. So they may delay the need to go to the hospitals, etc. And I think that would affect the health of these persons with disabilities. More importantly, when they are waiting, since they do not know about their prognosis, they may even diagnose themselves, which may give them scares and give them some situations. Now, with people with certain disabilities, so we may face a lot of difficulties. What we face is that in some persons with disabilities, there's a physical accessibilities, there is service accessibilities and others. But these would face the obstacles. For instance, physically, there's no ramps, there's no accessibility, restrooms, or some examination beds are difficult to climb up. Regarding information accessibilities, there are also traditional issues. For instance, there's absence of braille on signage or consent forms. Additionally, hospitals commonly use electronic or digital and intelligent systems of operations, but this would also lead to digital divide. For instance, most majorities now require appointment registration through WeChat mini programs or apps. but these are not always competitive with screen reader software. In hospital lobbies, information must about specialist availability must be printed on pamphlets with very small text or small fonts, or they are displayed on a large screen that you allow people to scroll the information, which is difficult for visually impaired individual to access. Also, self-help, self-service kiosks are often lacking audio outputs for screen reader software. And in terms of communication with medical staff, persons with hearing impairments also face significant challenges. But despite some progress, there is still a lack of understanding, respect, and cooperation for the healthcare professionals towards persons with disabilities. For instance, some persons with disabilities are questioned upon entering into the examining room with remarks like, "Where's your family member? Why didn't they accompany you?" Or if the family member is present, then the doctors would only talk to the family members, completely ignoring the disabled disabilities. Persons with visually disability often want the doctor to speak slowlier or repeat what they say, but the doctors refuse to accommodate. When the hearing impaired patients want to use voice-to-text software for assistance, doctors may not allow it. But of course, I will talk about the reasons afterwards. But in addition to discrimination-based disability, there are also gender-based discrimination. For instance, some disabled disabilities have been sexually assaulted during medical examinations because they were perceived as vulnerable. All these are issues that we're already familiar with and are easy to expect. Actually, during the examination, we found that there are actually other problems faced by persons with disabilities. For instance, if you visited, there are a lot of people, it's a populated place, and under these environments, what the persons with disabilities will face great issues. For instance, there are a lot of voices and there are people storming on and off, and this would definitely impact the orientations of a person with hearing disabilities and visual disabilities. A person with hearing disabilities shared that during an imaging test, they had no problem. They are able to read lips, or they are able to use the hearing assisted devices, but when they enter the hospital, all these are invalid. They felt very disappointed and frustrated, and the medication process is also very complex. They need to run through different exam rooms, receiving wrong instructions. I talked about a lot, and you can feel that these difficulties affect not only the difficulties of medical visits, not able to meet the process, the feelings experienced by persons with disabilities is also traumatized. For instance, one person with hearing disabilities said that during examination, because it's an imaging examination, so the technicians is in the next door. They may give some instructions, ask him to do something, but he's not able to hear. And the technicians storm in and very violently oppose this person to the position that he wants. So this put them in a very stressed situation. Some persons with disabilities will also ask by the government to leave, or they may even be laughed at. So these are all mental torture for persons with disabilities. A lot of times they would feel stressed, depressed, fatigue, fear, and shame. This contributes to some people avoiding medical visits or delaying their visits. And this would even accumulate the fear and also worry of persons with disabilities. And because of these difficulties and inaccessibilities of the hospitals, many persons with disabilities have to rely on their family and friends to accompany them to hospitals. This further gives them stress, feeling that they are making people's life more troublesome. Furthermore, doctors' lack of understanding about the bodies of persons with disability. For instance, an interview with scoliosis mentioned that during the ultrasound, the doctors struggle to locate their organs because their organs are very different from non-disabled individuals. A wheelchair user was advised to lose weight and walk more. highlighting the lack of awareness of the need and circumstances of persons with disabilities within this modern medical field. So all those would, of course, means that persons with disabilities need to spend more time, more money, and energy on medical visits. And these are not individual cases. They interact with one another. For instance, if healthcare facilities may not have a very complex physical layout, but when the persons with disabilities want to seek information, the professionals may be impatient in communicating with them. So even though it's an easier environment, but they are difficult to navigate and find where they want to go. So considering all these challenges, are our current standards or understanding of accessibility adequate? For China, accessibility standards primarily focuses on basic facilities such as transportation, accessibility rooms, entrances, elevators, and parking spaces. Of course, these are very important and fundamental, but there are minimum supports. However, when people visit hospitals, they're not there for sightseeing, they're not there for restrooms. They are there for their medical care. So if our accessibility efforts only addresses on these physical facilities and these basic aspects, then I think it is not integrating with professional medical needs. I call these phenomena as a suspended accessibility. It is suspended above. Why is it suspended, detached from the professional systems? We know that accessibility is a professional field. You can't just imagine and think that, oh, it's accessible now. It has a very strict standards. However, what we want to focus on is that it needs to intersect and integrate with the professional field for it to be meaningful. When we talk about this professional field, it is not just a technical standards. It has its technical contents, of course. For instance, some medical equipment, treatment processes, and medical needs. These are professional needs. For instance, for infusion pumps, we need to require the monitoring, and we need to alert nurses when they're almost empty. But it is hard for the persons with visual disabilities, or during CT or MRI scans, patients are often instructed to breathe, hold their breath, and exhale. Also, and they also have the reminders through verbal reminders, which create issues for persons with hearing disabilities. I had interviewees, many of them actually said that I've never known that actually when we are doing CT scans, I need to hold my breath and exhale. Then this means that the results for examination would not be very good. And the doctors also did not remind them. I also have some signage, visual signage. For instance, the lights will turn up or on, meaning that they should hold their breath or exhale. But I found that there's still issues even with that, because for MRI scans, you can't actually have metal equipment. You need to remove your glasses. Not to mention persons with disabilities. I have terrible eyesight. If I remove my glasses, I will not be able to see the light. So there are very special circumstances. For instance, removing your metal equipment, removing your glasses. You need to understand the technicalities of this equipment for the accessibility to be achieved. In addition to technical requirements, we also need to understand the professional fields. First of all, professional fields is ever changing. Think about this. Just like the accessibilities in the restrooms will not change that frequently, but for professional fields, it changes very quickly. You have new equipment, new technologies, new circumstances, new contents. We now understand that now AI is in every aspect. This brings new considerations. Do they take into consideration the needs of persons with disabilities? Do these equipments also provide accessibility or change or depth So the accessibility in professional fields do not have a fixed standard. It needs to be influenced and catch up according to the development of the professional fields. So the accessibility in these professional fields is even more complex. When persons with disabilities enter into this field, then there will also be challenges. So support for accessibility should continue to change for that. The third thing that I want to emphasize is that professional fields also is influenced by social and cultural factors, not just technical aspects. For instance, we mentioned that for voice-to-text software, which is widely used by persons with hearing disabilities, even though the effect might not be ideal, but at least it's used very commonly. But why is it's difficult to use it in medical settings? Why is it doctors do not allow it? Because actually in China, the relationship between doctors and patients are quite tense. So that means when patients, when they try to record to preserve evidence in so that in the future, if there are litigations, they can use that as an evidence. So this means a sort of mistrust, distrust to the doctors. So the doctors would be reluctant and are resistant. So the doctors may stop examinations when they see a cell phone. They may even have further disputes. So this will prevent persons with disabilities to start using their mobile phones. Or even if they take that out, they will not allow to be used. So this may not be solved by technology alone. Like I said, if for regional hospitals, they are very populated. What about other, for instance, community-based hospitals? They may not be that populated. Does that mean that it would be easier for persons with disabilities to go to the doctors? No, not really. The majority of the persons with disabilities would still say that they would rather go to a regional hospital because, first of all, it is the quality of the medical services. Secondly, is that for these community hospitals, the situation is even worse because community hospitals have smaller scale and smaller budget. It is very different from a large-scale regional hospitals. So the accessibility equipment is even scarcer. Secondly, community hospitals have fewer income. The quality of those professionals may be even lower. So professionals may not understand less regarding the persons with disabilities and their needs. And community hospitals also do not serve that many people. They may not be familiar or never seen a person with disabilities before, so they would have terrible treatment towards them. Because of these different considerations, if it's difficult for them to have medical visits in large hospitals and in small hospitals. And also, for the social environment and the systems is closely related but when we think about accessibilities, we don't take these considerations. It is limited to the physical environment.
So our accessibility first needs to be integrated with all professional fields. Only when we can do that, people with disability can enter the professional fields. And only when they are able to enter these fields can we find their disabilities, can we identify these needs and facilitate change to ensure professional integration between professionalism and accessibility. And in this process, it's not only about integration, it's about reflecting upon a professional field, its ableist or ableism issues. And so, for instance, it doesn't mean that the visually impaired cannot study medicine or clinical medicine. So we can look at this system. We find that we may assume that is the case, but we can constantly reflect upon if it's really the case. And such reflection can greatly promote the progress in each professional field. And as I mentioned, the attention to medicine for people with disability can help us expand medicine in general. And how to do so? First, we need to have, from start to end, complete participation of people with disability. Secondly, we need involvement from all professional fields. We need professionals to participate, and we need to integrate the abilities, individual abilities and professional skill, and we need a dynamic mechanism to expand accessibility and move professional fields forward. In 1995, the Beijing city promotes mainstream of social genders. In 2006, WHO promotes that health needs to go into all policies. So today we need to think about how to incorporate disability and accessibility to all aspects of our lives in the society, and to have all professional fields move forward. And with inclusion and progress like this, only with this can people with disability be actually participating in all aspects of society and to improve everyone's life. Thank you all very much. Thank you to Professor Yu Lian for the analysis on the medical service. And next, we have Professor Huang Shichun from College of Law at National Taiwan University for a discussion.
好的，谢谢
Thank you to Professor Cho, our moderator, and our dear presenters. I'm the discussant for this session. I am honored to have this opportunity. So from this session, all four presenters present their studies and present how diverse supported decision-making is in East Asia. For example, the research of Professor Zhou compared the situations of personal assistance in Korea, Japan, and Taiwan in comparing practices and policies. And PA is a very practical field of supported decision-making. The second presenter, Professor Otani, talks about the feasibility and accessibility of decision-making, especially life and death decision-making, and how euthanasia or other decisions like this connects to people with disabilities and the society. And the third presenter, Kim Kang-won, talk about the current situations and challenges of supported decision-making in Korea and the importance of regulations as the basis for progress. And all these are responding to my discussion because we all are lawyers, we have legal background. So I'd like to thank you to Mr. Kim for highlighting regulations. And our next presenter is Professor Yu Lian, talking about accessibility of medical service and expand participation of people with disability in the society. So I want to talk about the current legal framework of supported decision-making in Taiwan. So that is a rough roadmap. And because of time constraints, I want to have more time allotted for interaction from the attendants. So I will skip to the conclusion. Up front, simply put, supported decision-making requires basic regulations starting from the civil courts and reform in adult guardianship. But from our observation as legal experts, it's very difficult to amend the civil code. So my proposal today, or my recommendation today, is that to reform civil code to implement wider supported decision-making, we need to start from outside in, we need to start from bottom up, from specific or a more narrow scoped regulation so that we can move the hard stance of the Ministry of Justice and the Judicial Yuan. I'm not targeting them, but that's my observation and personal experience. I'll skip through the regulations because we're all familiar with it. So the paradigm shift here is that we need to transform from substitute decision-making to supported decision-making. So all countries encounter this paradigm shift by CRPD. And in Taiwan, similar to Korea, we do have adult guardianship as well. And the difference is that we only have two-tier system. We have guardianship and assistance. There is no third tier or category. In 2019, the guardianship system allows people to choose guardians at will. But for assistants, you cannot appoint or assign a assister on their own. So what's the implementation of this system? Pardon me on the drafting. So 2008, that was the start of guardianship. The number of people using assistance and guardianship in total, less than 3,000 cases. As of 2020, the numbers have doubled. The numbers under guardianship reaching 5,000, and cases receiving assistance is nearly 1,000. And that's old data. In 2022, the figures are much higher. And that's similar to Korea. That's the most severe level, guardianship, with more people using such service. And assistance is actually with fewer people, so people may criticize that we do not reflect or that isn't consistent with CRPD principles for supported decision making. And the concluding observations for Taiwan CRPD National Report in 2022, the IRC expresses concern that the state A, so that's paragraph 63, A, B, and E are cited here. So for A and B have more to do with guardianship, I'm sure. For item A, our friends from Korea and Japan are quite familiar with it. The IRC stating that we have not transitioned from substitutive decision-making to supported decision-making. And from item B and item E saying that judicial personnel needs further education, helping them to overcome the application of the principle of best interest and replace it with respecting the people's will and preferences. I think I want to highlight item E because that's more special. Because in the national report and review in Korea and Japan didn't mention this, financial services. But in Taiwan, the IRC pointed out that in Taiwan, we need to amend financial services and measures to eliminate all forms of discrimination against persons with disabilities. That is less seen in other Asian countries. So this comment inspires something for us. So let's say if the Ministry of Justice's pace in amending the civil code lacks IRC recommendations requirements, do we have any other options so that we can be more consistent with SDM principles? So here are my other proposals. I feel that for every individual, their ability to make decisions vary. For example, the simpler choices or decision-making, going to the grocery store to shop, and the harder decisions, such as whether to take a vaccine or not, or whether to go to a dentist or not. These are tougher decisions, and the hardest ones would be futures transactions, real estate transactions with higher risk and involving financial decisions. So all of these decisions require different levels of capacity and judgment. So it may be more difficult for us to follow the civil code to determine whether we have decision-making capacity or not. So perhaps we can start from the smaller decisions, gradually introduce supportive decision-making to reform the current system. So let's make an inventory on supports or assistance for other people to make decisions. So other than adult guardianship under the civil code, there are already existing mechanisms or framework in place on existing regulations. For example, I put it in the first item because it's the highest level of legalization. It's stipulated in the civil code, but we often forget about the article. So this states that a spouse on a daily life matters has the representation. So if I have a spouse who lost the capacity of decision-making, the spouse has this legal authority to make decision on daily life matters. the second item would be less of a lesser extent. That would be spread across all medical service regulations. For example, for the patient to make autonomous decisions, to have an agent on medical decisions. And the third option would be a little bit further away from existing regulations that are the trivial regulations on financial services. Perhaps we can incorporate supportiveness to decision making. And next proposal would be in social service providers. So there is lesser extent of legal aspects, but we can implement that in the throughout the process of service. So these are the there is a spectrum of legal and non-legal aspects. So I'm gonna skip through several pages. In terms of medical or healthcare decision making, there are already laws in place stipulating the identity of the decision makers and their authority, and some of the so these are all trivial that you can find suitable supporters for your decision making. And for the third aspect, that responds to the concluding observations from the second national report. For financial services, is it possible to introduce friendlier measures for people with disability? And the FSC has been quite active in this aspect and putting out guidelines since 2022. And I want to highlight something that you can refer to is the Trust Association and the Banking Industry Association and all the other associations for financial institutions such as insurance and futures. All these associations put out guidelines focusing on people with dementia. So they have put out a new guideline focusing on people with dementia, recognizing something that's never seen in their civil codes. The supporters, they're under the term third parties. The third parties can accompany people who are susceptible to have dementia or are diagnosed with dementia. So they can accompany these people to financial institutions to conduct simple transactions or to conduct simple procedures. So, for example, the Trust Association stipulates that if a person with dementia, if the decision making involves securing their property, even though they show the condition of dementia, we cannot deny their right to make decisions. With third parties supporting them, they can have the authority to access information and make decisions on their own. We should not reject their request.
This is something that may seem a bit progress. Last but not least, let's jump to the last slide. In providing a general services, how do we realize the spirits of supported decision making? We've worked with Professor Moru Morichi and made a relevant research. This is the finding of our research. I think maybe not surprisingly, since that if you work for over 15 years, social workers with over 15 years of work, in their work awareness and in their everyday work, they would think about supported decision making and realize supported decision making. So the quality of these service providers and whether or not they include supported decision making would also be something that we can think about in terms of reform. All in all, in conclusion, I believe that with conscious changes would definitely be a definite prerequisite for realizing supported decision making. In terms of law, even though the civil code made it difficult to change, but in other softer law or in other regulations, we can still try to make improvements. That's my sharing. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Huang Sichun, for sharing with us this topic of supported decision making in So I will have to close this session by 4:40 because Professor Huang Sichun closes her remarks in 10 minutes so that we can still have a little bit of time for Q&As. But tomorrow, if you haven't had a chance to ask your questions, you still have an opportunity to ask questions. But since we still have 10 more minutes, I feel that I still want to open up for one final questions. Any questions, please raise your questions to our presenters.
네, 발표 잘 들었고요. 아까 그 활동 지원서.
Thank you for the presentations. You've collected the information for different countries, which is wonderful. In different countries, institutions that helped supported decision-making, when did it start? And also, how can persons with disabilities apply for such services? Also, the situation in Korea is like this. We have independent living centers. It was expanded from a public services to a private services. What I want to share with you is that I want to know, you've all mentioned this earlier. There may be some conflicts or contradictory. For instance, they're not able to support our decision-making in jobs, in work. It may not be able to support our decision-making in physical decisions and bodily decisions. For instance, for persons with severe disabilities, if they want to go to the restroom, without this physical assistance and support, they may only need 10 minutes of support at work, or when they're at work, they may have faced some issues or challenges and need to make a decision, be it in Taiwan or Japan. Do you also face situations similar to what I mentioned in Korea? Thank you for the questions. I will then ask each of the presenters to briefly answer the question in one sentence or two. Supported decision-making and how are they realized and implemented in your own country?
Would you like to reply?
Okay, so it seems to be a topic that is difficult to cover. But let's keep this question in mind. Let's continue to ponder about it, right? Because supported decision-making in special education, we often ask, is it important to or important for? Because a lot of times, emotionally, I may feel that this is very important. I want to do it, but they may cause a lot of problems externally. From life to death, we actually go to the hospitals, we go to the education, to the day where we live in the community, we need to maybe help use assistance to help us live independent, and also for the assisted guardianship, etc. And also how do we live a life, and what kind of efforts do we need to more in order to allow persons with disabilities to live independently. Coming back to these presentations, in terms of jurisprudence, we do have something that we can work on, but in practice, of course, there's more to work on. Yes. Can I just say a few words? I used a very little time, so I think I can use more. My article is not directly related to assisted decision-making, but I also just want to say and call that actually my article is comparison between Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. I also want to add in 2024, the budget for Taiwan, our GDP is actually the highest among the three countries. However, this always concerns me. And why is it we are so lagging behind in this field? I've also hoped that with the, I would like to take this opportunity and ask the help from Japanese and Korean advocates. What exactly is the problem? That's just what I want to say, because I'm not using a lot of time back then. Okay, thank you. Yes, in addition to practitioners, I think we can also think that what are some others, for instance, families, they are also playing a very important role in supported decision-making. Thank you very much for joining us online or here with us. Once again, thank you, presenters and discussants. Thank you. A round of applause for them.
感谢主
Thank you. Thank you, topic 3, for the very wonderful discussion. Next, a break for 10 minutes. Please be back at 4:50. We will begin our final session at 4:50 with Dean Zhang Henghao as the keynote speaker. Thank you.
Was a pioneer in this field ever since more than 10 years ago, and he has led a group of students and published so many papers on this, so that today we can have all these professionals from different backgrounds, including law, medicine, and care and social studies, and to all contribute to the development of disability studies and disability support. So without further ado, let's pass the mic to Professor Zhang, who will talk about something that's under discussion and requires a lot of improvement and progress in Taiwan: reconstructing an inclusive imagined community, reflections on UN CRPD implementation in Taiwan. Hello everyone, I'm honored to be invited to talk with you about Taiwan's situation in implementing CRPD for Taiwan in 10 years, what has happened, and where do we go from now. I worry a lot for this speech because there are so many pioneers ahead of me. They are more experienced and more qualified to speak on this than me. We have professors from Japan and Korea, and however, the organizer said that it's my turn. So here I am. I'd also like to take this opportunity to reflect upon CRPD. Seems like a prominent issue. People always talk about CRPD, the spirits of CRPD, but the spirits of every individual may be inconsistent. So perhaps we can have a more macro perspective to reflect upon a new model, a new mindset on disability, and how we have changed and where should we go from here. Okay. So this is the first slide. Why am I using this exciting or provocative picture here? We always talk about inclusion in disability, but Taiwan is not included in the UN. When we talk about inclusion, any person from Taiwan should value inclusion the most compared to any other national, because we're segregated by the United Nations. We're not recognized legally, even though we are a member of international community, but we are not a part of it. And CRPD National Review, as Commissioner Wang Youling mentioned, that it is not a part of the formal review system, even though we have so many international experts and friends taking the risk of being objected or excluded from the international community to come here as international experts to help us with our state reports. So with the 5 days of review of the state report, some say that having 5 days like this, the system is actually better than the UN. But it is still not UN review. It's still not a part of UN human rights system. So this fact of Taiwan being excluded from the UN, the people with disability has this similar situation, being excluded and not respected as an equal part in the community. So I still want to talk about this, that some students or practitioners in social service or social work come to me and ask me what we have accomplished for 10 years of CRPD. We have come up with so many plans. We have published so many papers. What is done? What can be changed? What's effective? It's really difficult to answer such questions. Going back to the progress of promoting human rights. No situation can be changed overnight. Anything can be changed overnight. It's probably not as significant. So when we look at CRPD, we can see where we came from and what are the challenges that we see. I'm reminded that time is limited. So I can never be later than scheduled. It's my duty. But the rights or advocacy for rights of people with disability, of course, didn't start with CRPD. Why would I use this topic? So Taiwan, after World War II, we encountered this engineering or construction of establishing a country. We are establishing an imagined community. And who are the members of this imagined community? Are people with disabilities part of this imagined community? When we look at since 1980s, legislation changed. But earlier than that, we had advocacy, just as Professor Da Xing told us that before 1980s, there were already advocacy for persons with visual impairments, calling for equal rights, even though the language was not of modern human rights standards, but advocacy was already there. And people often forget the founder of Eden Foundation, Liu Xia. She's also one of the co-founders of the League for Persons with Disabilities. So this very early on, before 1980s, she encountered discrimination. She shared one story that she went to an exhibition on national infrastructure and she was rejected. She said that, because important VIPs are coming, so people with disabilities should not attend. And that is why she sees advocacy as her own mission. She wants to step up with friends with disabilities. So she stepped up and founded Eden Foundation, and she co-founded the League of Persons with Disabilities. So disability education didn't start since CRPD. And we can see that even though there are laws in place, there's still a lot of exclusion occurring for people with disability. And from such advocacy, we can finally see that people with disability are excluded from the society. And we also see parents participating in advocacy and community exclusion. I am going to skip very quickly through the details. The Fengqiao incident in 1983, it's a daycare center that's excluded or rejected by communities, and the parents advocated for that. And that is a start for us to see zero rejection issue in education. So a lot of contemporary CRPD languages already had their historical presence in Taiwan before CRPD came into place. There are multiple people, different parties using different languages, different terms, different ways to call for rights for people with disability and to offer different services. And since 2004, we see more and more organizations advocating for people with disability and emphasizing on the people with disabilities to speak their voice, including the new Vitality Independent Living Association as well as other organizations. So there is a new generation of DPOs in place.
And many new organizations emerged. Of course, it's good for a democratic state. Some people start to complain, why are there so many organizations? Well, because we have a very diverse society. Of course, we have very diverse organizations. So that's why we have persons with disabilities. We have Taiwan disabled youth. We have association proposals with psychosocial disabilities. Allowing these different topics of persons with disabilities to be seen itself is very important. And CRPD did make a difference because, for instance, we see the language of power started to be seen in their advocacy. Instead of just asking for benefits or welfare, they started to say that this is their right. I also start to see human rights organizations getting involved. They're saying that the rights of persons with disabilities should be seen as human rights. During democratization, Taiwan focuses in the past only on ICCPR, ICSR, and gender issues. And they only look at the rights of persons with disabilities as a welfare issue. But Covenants Watch, after the international review, started to see the importance of rights of persons with disabilities, started to gather the power of DPOs and try to voice the opinions of CSOs. And that's important. Of course, we can't say that CRPD facilitates all those. Absolutely not. But what we can see is that CRPD play an influence in this process. We started to understand the importance of a dialogue. We started to understand that among these different DPOs, they have different agendas, but focusing on their own agenda is not enough. So, of course, CRPD has a role in Taiwan, and we need to talk about this more, even though we're excluded from the UN system. Even though in terms of promoting many of our policies, we have a lot of frustrations and insufficiencies. Then, of course, what we also see is that we've established the Taiwan National Human Rights Commission. In the morning, we discussed that, there were only 3 cases. There were some discussions in administrative laws. It seems that we don't have that many litigations, but it's a beginning. It's a start. We started to use laws as a way to solve and try to address the rights of persons with disabilities instead of using, as we did in the past, the welfare means. Even though for the past decades, 3 cases may seem few, but it's better than nothing. We started to see legal scholars, legal aid foundations to be involved. We started to allow persons with disabilities to know that when their rights are infringed, we actually have a legal means to deal with this dispute. They have other ways other than advocacy and petitions. They started to have a new way as a weapon for advocacy. This I will go very quickly. Of course, what you see immediately is that on the general comments provided by UN, it is very different from the context of Taiwan. Deinstitutionalization is a topic that has been discussed very frequently. But if you look at our situation after World War II, we've never had a history of institutionalization. Well, we do have an institutional we do have an institution, which is Yuli Institution. But for the past 2 to 3 decades in Taiwan, it is a history of managing and overseeing these unregistered private institutions. It is a history of states trying to manage different private institutions. Because, as discussed earlier, the majority of these people stay in their own house. And it's different from the topic that's been discussed at the UN level. Our topic is more about these people become the burden or responsibility of their families, or they've been locked within the family instead of being locked within the institution and not being treated humanely. So we started to see our own, that so-called way of living, way of residency. For instance, this is a social housing. This is a social housing, and in the middle there's a small building. This is a small institution within the social housing. There are people living inside. They also have daytime care, daytime supported services. From a Western perspective, they still see it as an institution. But in the context of Taiwan, this already breaks the so-called traditional large-scale institutions, or from the past where these institutions are located in a faraway place. This already is an institution located within the community. So in a way, it is still connected with the society. From the convention perspective, of course, this definitely violates the convention. But from a local needs, when there are still protections protests from the communities, this seems like to be a compromise. I don't like compromise. As a social scholar, I don't like compromises. But in this society, with rapid aging and with these rapid needs, you need to have a feasible solution. Otherwise, you're just shouting from empty places without having a solution. And I don't think that's practical. You can't really, this is not a way to provide ways for people with needs. Coming back to my original topic, after World War II, we are trying to build a community. We pride ourselves as having a democracy, but on the other side, we see another face of democracy. We see protests from the persons with disabilities. You see these village heads saying that we don't need persons with disabilities in our community. Of course, now there's involvement of the laws and regulations and negotiations. We start to see fewer and fewer disputes, but you have to admit that inclusion, seeing persons with disabilities as part of our communities, is not part of our culture. It's not part of our society, and that is why sometimes this becomes a wall that is hard to break. And unfortunately, you start to see these disputes between anxious, aging families with adult disabled members encountering the CRPD fundamentalists. They feel that you scholars are blind, you don't see the pain of us as parents. But there's lack of communication and understanding, because we first need to understand the context of Taiwanese society. And I think it's a pity. We bring up this issue, but how can we realize this in Taiwan? What's the future directions? What's the feasible solution? These are the ways that we should try to think of. So yes, there are a lot of possibilities for local practices. We don't need to see deinstitutionalization as the only goal. I think there are a lot of discussions that says that we need to talk about having control over your life, having autonomy, how to actually live within a community. When you are only locked within a household, that's not living in a community. And what kind of community do you want to live in? What kind of community can really be inclusive, can really build a sense of belonging? This is the goal that we should work on. All right, time flies. I only have 3 points. I will finish very soon. Future challenges and future work. What do we need to do? This is a very big topic. I'm quite anxious. But I often talk about this. CRPD indeed changed our perspective for persons with disabilities. From the past, as subsidies and reliance, and now we see them as a subject, see their subjectivity. But interestingly, in the mainstream, they still see it from like a charity model, from a philanthropy model. That sort of discourse is still in the mainstream media. So on one hand, you see a very strong persons with disability discourse, but at the same time, we still see a lot of charity discourse, and this is a better way to get money. But how do we live within the same community with such discourse and actually exert their own power and rights? We need to be more skillful in trying to find that balance. Also, within this discussion, what has been ignored is that we tend to individualize these rights. We don't reflect upon the blind sides of individual model. We start to talk about social model and rights model, but social model is not to criticize medical model. It is to criticize the individual models, because we seem to, because of CRPD, the rights of CRPD becomes like the relationship between the state and the individual. These individuals are completely individualized. We forget that these persons still live within a community, still within a family. So if you're talking about individual rights, you still need to connect it with social relations and families, etc. I'm not saying we need to come back to like a welfare model where a family decides the rights of a person with disabilities, but in any type of societies, human beings are relational beings. We are not independent from families and from the communities. So if we want to talk about an inclusive community, if we want to talk about this interconnected individual and autonomy, what we need to think about is, well, coming back to what Professor Huang just said, relations are important. Autonomy should also build on the building of relationships. Autonomy should not be something empty and coming out of nowhere. We need to start reflecting upon the insufficiency of individualizations. While respecting the autonomy of an individual, we still need to bring in different relations, such as families and communities. That's the first thing. Secondly, as a scholar, I have some complaints. I saw these friends from Japan and Korea. In the past few years, they had a lot of investments and involvement and engagement in CRPD research. But in Taiwan, there's not a lot of investment in the research on humanities and social studies. Research is not like a magic pill that can solve everything. But when advocacy becomes your word against my words, without research, without evidence-based research, we'll not be able to move too much. Many government-funded research still are medical-oriented, which means that they still see as a rehabilitation or changing. If they want to change the conditions of a person with disabilities, they get a lot of resources and fundings that looks at it from this disability society that looks at it from the disability survival mode, and that has no echoes. And there has no resonance. We need more research in this area in order to facilitate dialogue. And also, perhaps Yue Qing also talk about actually the lived experiences of people with disabilities are meaningful, because we need to include the voices of persons with disabilities and include this in inclusive research. Research should not build on imagination. Research should be based deeply on the lived experiences of persons with disabilities. Last but not least, I want to talk about this. Nothing about us without us. We need nothing about us without us 2.0. Disability movements, of course, talks about the history of exclusion for persons with disabilities. Yue Qing and I conducted the research looking at the persons with disabilities committees. There are not a lot of DPO representatives, and their focus is mainly on specific types of disabilities.
However, we really need to have the voices of people with disability in all issues and all aspects. In a democratic, inclusive society, this principle should apply to all groups. That is what we mean as we, us, as an imagined community. No minority group should dictate what everyone has or what to do. When democracy or democratic issues is not about just about personal aspirations or personal wishes. It's about compromises. We need to negotiate. We need to reach consensus. We need to balance the voices of multiple groups and come up with a decision together. That is the largest difficulty for contemporary democracy. So nothing about us without us should be the principle of all aspects and all issues, so that we can have a more reasonable, more efficient, more willing dialogue mechanism. Especially now, our goal is about allotting social and national resources. We're talking about redistribution of national resources. Indeed, we need further or more extensive social dialogue. And we're constantly overlooked. People with disability are constantly overlooked. The issue is always deemed as a minority issue. Disability issue should be in the mainstream. Every issue should have participants of people with disability. We're talking about a conference hall. It's so difficult for us to find a really accessible venue for us. Even this venue, the accessible toilets are in the first floor, and we are at the 6th floor. And that is the current condition of Taipei City. And people may wonder whether the possibility of going to other cities, well, other cities are worse. So to put this issue in the mainstream, we need to think about general design, and we need to think about journey or experience-oriented human rights practices. We are always talking the talk, we're not walking the walk. We need to come up with a timeline and the specific goals to implement, and that is our goal for the next decades and going in the future. Thank you. Thank you to Professor Zhang. As the moderator of the last session, our most important duty is to make up the time. So sorry, we cannot open for the floor. Today, I will give you a brief response towards responding to Professor Zhang, but we do have Q&A sessions in discussion tomorrow. And so if you have any questions, you can note them down and hand them in tomorrow. So here's my brief response. So thank you to Professor Zhang. And talking about the founder of our league, Liu Xia. So our league, since the 1990s up until now, we have been we have aspired ourselves to participate in all issues involving disability. And ever since our foundation, Liu Xia proposed a very important concept that's response to Professor Zhang's statement that we can only work together and find consensus before we can state our claims with the government and society. And CRPD since 2014 has been implemented in Taiwan. A lot of pioneers in disability advocacy, including Commissioner Huang Rongjang of National Human Rights Commission. And so our journey has been supported by the contribution of these pioneers, so that we can make progress in important issues on CRPD. So going back to our forum today, we have two important purposes. Whether it's a forum held in 2018 or today, we want to facilitate dialogue. We want to create a platform for all people regardless of their disability or regardless of background, can have this platform to having a conversation together. The second purpose of our league is to conduct research. We want to be able to facilitate more international research and studies. For example, after today's venue, Korean Disability Development Institute is going to visit the league next week to seek understanding on the current implementation of CRPD in Taiwan. So there will be more cross-field and cross-country collaboration facilitated by our forum, and we can meet once every year, and we can build upon that and continue to work together. This wraps up our session today. Thank you very much, but don't leave yet. Going back to the housekeeping announcements from the organizers, and there were issues with there were technical issues with interpreting devices. I'm sure the problems are resolved. Apologies to all those affected. If you still encounter problems, please call us. And we respect all the language used in every country. So disability in China is used as 残疾 disability. But for Taiwan, there should be disability in Chinese. We need to adopt a more non-discriminative terminology. So apologies to our attendants in Taiwan for the misuse of Chinese terminology. So apologies from our league. So tomorrow, the registration starts at 8:30. And the first session of keynote speech by Rosemary Chaos will begin at 9 a.m. And please return your interpreting devices, and you can borrow them again tomorrow morning. And I wish every success to you, and see you again tomorrow. Thank you.